Welcome to the Biochar Show, where innovation meets sustainability. I'm your host, Megan K. Lees, and today we have two incredible guests who are shaking up the future of farming, carbon tech, and climate action. First up is Harper Moss, the co-founder and CEO of CarbonZero, who launched her climate mission at just 15 years old. What started as a dream to reforest the Amazon has grown into the bold, boots-on-the-ground effort to bring biochar to over 500 million acres of American farmland. She's helping lead the charge on farmer education, soil regeneration, and large-scale carbon drawdown. And joining her is Gregory Ray, CarbonZero's co-founder and CTO. Gregory's background is rooted in cutting-edge technology. He helped build one of the first 3D gaming engines for iPhone, led multi-million-dollar ventures, and now applies that same systems thinking to scaling biochar solutions. From gamification to real-world carbon markets, Greg is helping bridge tech and agriculture in ways few others have. Together, Harper and Greg are on a mission to tackle the U.S. biochar shortage and regenerate the soils 1 acre at a time. Harper and Greg, welcome to the Biochar Show. Very excited to have you both on here.
Thanks for having us, Megan.
Yes, thank you for taking the time out to give our listeners some insight into your company at such a young age. So Harper, let's go back to the beginning. You had the idea for CarbonZero at just 15. What was the spark and how did your early vision evolve into what the company is today?
Yeah, so my interest in climate change actually started with my love of animals. I've always loved animals, and I saw the negative impact that climate change was having on certain animals, habitat loss, disruption to the food chain, ecosystem, etc. That really made me aware and want to think about how I could help. So I looked at different approaches like afforestation and soil sequestration, but through lots of research, I ultimately came to the conclusion that the best way to help would be for my company to reduce carbon emissions somehow. I was lucky enough to have taken a design thinking class my freshman year of high school. And then at the start of junior year, I got accepted into a social entrepreneurship program. And so both of those sort of helped me to think through the mechanics and strategies and steps in making a business and coming up with an idea. And I've also been very fortunate. I've grown up in Silicon Valley, so I've been surrounded by startups my whole life. I've spent a lot of hours of my childhood actually at startups. And so to me, creating a company just didn't feel as foreign or overwhelming as it might feel to someone who hasn't had those same experiences.
And Greg, you've come from a wildly different world as well. As you've got gaming, mobile tech, entertainment. What drew you to the climate space and the mission behind CarbonZero?
Yeah, I was really excited. So I know Harper through her father. So we played Dungeons and Dragons together. And when her dad brought it up to me, I was really excited about the idea. Like for one thing, I come from a background of sort of stealing attention away from people through video games, and now that I'm sort of in the latter half of my career, I'm looking back at that and, saying okay, well, was that the right thing? Like, do people really need to spend more time looking at their phones? So being able to change away from that and doing something positive for the world feels really good to me. And then my grandpa was actually an environmentalist. He helped write the Clean Water Act. So for me, this kind of feels like it's in my blood. And then also on that side of the family, we have a lot of farmers. So it's exciting to be doing something that is kind of going back to my roots.
So you both landed on biochar as sort of this missing piece. What convinced you this was the most scalable, immediate tool for carbon removal?
Everything else we looked at seemed to have problems. For example, in measuring and verification, when implementing soil health practices to increase soil organic matter. And with biochar, we could just really wrap our heads around it and see the vast amounts of biomass readily available to be sequestered. So combined with the co-benefit of being able to help and work with the farmers, just really made it the clear winner because it's a win-win situation.
Right. Greg, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that the science is really there's a lot of studies now on this, and so the science is just really solid. We know it works, we know it removes carbon, and it's really clear that, like Harper said, that there's so much biomass available, and we could go out, we could plant trees, but there's just no guarantee that those trees won't burned down or something. But with this, like, soon as we mix it with the compost and we put it back on the fields, we know we've sequestered that carbon for probably at least 1,000 years.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because biochar, for me, it feels so under the radar to the general public. I guess, like, in a way, how do you explain it, especially to, like you were saying, like farmers, especially being a little skeptical, or investors who want proof that it does actually work?
So there are so many studies out there, I think over 5,000, which all support the benefit of biochar for crops. But what I've discovered is that depending on the location, each soil is very different. So what works in Southern California might not work in Northern California. And I understand why farmers might be skeptical, because they understand that no matter how many studies there are out there, there's no guarantee that those results will be the same for them. So we think it's best to prove it, which is why we've partnered with the Colusa County Farm Supply to do biochar and compost trials with different compositions, and just going local and showing that it almost never hurts when applied correctly, and that it actually helps, we believe, is the key. And then for people outside of the climate space, I would sort of say, like, if we did nothing, these almonds would all decompose, and each molecule of carbon in these shells would bind with two oxygen molecules and form CO2, a greenhouse gas. And that would actually result in 3 times the amount of greenhouse gas than the actual weight of the shell itself. So what we're trying to do is we're slowing this decomposition down, and we're keeping the carbon locked in solid form for much longer, like Greg said, thousands, hundreds of years longer. So we're keeping the greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and in the ground.
And CarbonZero's mission is huge, with over 500 million acres. What's your strategic approach due to the scale of that impact?
The main thing is we found that tacking it one vertical at a time is the most appropriate. So, for example, with the almonds, which is what we've started with, we're working with different co-ops. So the way it's sort of broken down, well, at least in almonds and probably the same with walnuts, is that there's different levels of co-ops between the farmers. So, for example, here I'm actually at an almond processing facility in Colusa County right now, and we're installing a reactor. But this is owned by a co-op of farmers. I'd say like there's 30 or 40 of them. And then those farmers actually belong to a larger co-op, the Blue Diamond Co-op. So by utilizing this infrastructure that already exists with these co-ops, and with the infrastructure that exists with the compost, because most of these growers are already using compost, we're able to really quickly scale. Like, we looked at like the global south, and we thought about, like, should we go to the global south and do this? But we found that the infrastructure just didn't quite exist in the global south. Wasn't like the same aggregation of biomass. Things were more spread out, whereas here it's very consolidated. Like, within a mile of us, we have 3 compost yards where we can take our biochar as it comes off and immediately get it blended with the compost, and almost immediately within a few months it will end up in the fields, and we don't have to do anything to do that. And like, the farmers don't have to do anything. They don't have to change their practices because they're already using compost from these compost yards, and so we're able to scale very quickly that way.
So are you using mobile kilns to do it on site, or is that what you're building behind you were saying that
Yeah, it's
you're
not
just
a mobile kiln. So this kiln that's behind us can handle about 20,000 tons of almond shell per year, and we'll probably put more than one here because there's around 100,000 tons of almond shell within like 25 kilometers of us. So we'll be like working here on this site, and we'll be taking shell from nearby haulers as well. There's like 5 of them I could probably throw a rock and hit within this like just a few blocks of here. So it's huge piles. I wish I could show you, but it's behind this. But there's a pile of, probably 30,000 tons of almond shells right behind this reactor behind me, waiting to be turned into biochar.
farmer education is a big part of the challenge, because also they're skeptical and such. Harper, what have you found are the biggest knowledge gaps, and how are you bringing them forward to the, like, farmers, and to convince them sort of that this does work?
Yeah, so the most common thing is farmers might have heard about somebody trying biochar for their crops and it not working. And this is usually because it was done incorrectly or there was something wrong with the process. But I actually think that Greg can talk a bit more on the specifics on that because he has some really good insight.
No, I think Harper nailed it. It really is like I can think of one specific example. So within this group here, somebody has a rice field and they trialed some biochar on it, quite a bit of biochar in the rice field, but they didn't get any results from it. And when I was asking about like how did you apply it? They took raw biochar and then they put it on the field and then they flooded the field. And like that's not a practice that is supported by biochar. Like flooding it with water is generally because it will at that point, like if you put too much water, I think it'll just become hydrophobic and you won't have that, like it won't hold the nutrients. And so yeah, I really wouldn't expect it to work using it like that. I think that they'll see some benefits going into the future because once that dries out, then it will start to have the effect that we expect, which is it'll start to absorb the nutrients and then slow release the nutrients. And I think that the they'll see some gains in the future, but like I wouldn't expect like that, like to put it in, flood it, and then immediately in that next season to see a yield increase in rice. And that's what they were hoping when they did that. And so I think like just generally, like Harper mentioned earlier, like we're partnering with Colusa County Farm Supply, and it's about going in there and bringing the correct practices and saying like, hey, like you have to use the correct practices, but when you do use the correct practices, you're going to see really good results. And so like that's the main component of the education, I think.
So, from the CTO perspective, what are the technological or operational innovations you're working to help scale biochar development or deployment, I should say?
Yeah, I think like the main thing is just utilizing the heat. And so we generate quite a bit of heat, and what we would like is to be able to use that to power the plant so that we're basically that the plant itself is carbon negative or neutral. I mean, it is already carbon negative just by the amount of biochar we're creating, but we also would like to not be like doing any emissions at all from, using electricity on the grid. So if we can go off the grid and just utilize that heat so that we can generate electricity. I think that's the main thing. And then doing that will actually allow us to scale a lot faster because our cost of goods will go down. And so just the financial model will work a lot smoother.
And then same thing, like I mean, like in Canada too, with carbon credits, I'm assuming that also is beneficial probably to your business as well, like with carbon credits.
Yeah, that's our main thing is carbon credits.
There's a massive supply with biochar in the US. How are you two navigating the gap, and do you see a path to closing it?
Yeah, so a lot of small businesses would turn to bank loans for financing, but banks typically won't make loans for biochar because it isn't a proven sector, and farmers aren't able to get their hands on biochar without trucking it hundreds or thousands of miles because there's just a lack of facilities due to a lack of funding. And every farmer I've talked to has heard of biochar, and most would be willing to try it, but very few are willing to pay $800 per ton to have it trucked in. So we need more facilities, whether those be CarbonZero or others. We need them wherever farmers are. And to sort of address like how we are addressing it, like, I guess the simple answer is that we have solved the funding aspect by turning to venture capital and angel investors who are more willing to take risks on new technologies like ours compared to banks. And then by showing success at small scale, showing that the model works, then we believe that we can get more funding to help us reach our goal of 50 lines by 2030. And we plan to get as much biochar out there as we possibly can so that the farmers can see for themselves the benefits of reduced fertilizer costs, reduced water usage, and just the benefits of like healthier soil along with the environmental benefits, of course.
Especially because you're where you are, it's not as dry as Los Angeles, but do you get dry spouts as well? I mean, that's just like that's a benefit of biochar as well. If you're not in a heavily, rainy sort of type of a place. Have you had either of you had any moments in the field or in testing where you thought, this is working? Like you have a proven success story, I guess, because you were saying with the almonds, but another, like, unlike the rice story.
So we're going to be conducting studies with the Colusa County Farm Supply using our biochar this winter. So we're not exactly there yet. I would say, however, there's a study called the Oasis Vineyard Study, which is a great study done in California where the positive results were super clear. I would recommend people to look it up because it was done on a brand new vineyard in California where they applied biochar on day zero, and they were getting it worked into the soil, and they tracked the yield results over 5 years. And 5 years later, they are still seeing meaningful gains. And I can't exactly remember the exact numbers or details, but I think everyone can and should definitely look up the Oasis Vineyard study.
So you created more than just a company, especially at age 16. You've created this momentum. How do you build partnerships and keep the mission alive across such diverse stakeholders? You were saying like now people are getting more into it. So now you're getting venture capitalists and stuff interested.
Our company has two primary goals, like we've said before: combat climate change and support farmers. We really couldn't exist without having a close partnership with farmers. And between those two goals of helping the farmers and combating climate change, I think what we found, and I think what you will find, is that almost everyone believes in at least one of them. And so the path was finding, or the key unlock was finding a path that is truly a win-win for the climate and for the farmers.
I mean, we've been really fortunate with our press. When we did our press release announcing the funding, we had a lot of inbound interest from folks wanting to partner with us. And so I think like one of the things is just continuing that momentum with the press and just listening. Like we try to answer every email that comes in. There's a lot of really cool projects out there that look like, make great partners. Like Harper said, like we really want to see biochar out there. And so whether it's CarbonZero biochar or other biochar, like we really just believe in this product and we believe that it will help humanity. And so we want to see everyone win.
So let's kind of dive into the next question. If tomorrow you had unlimited funding and, full farmer buy-in, what would be your first 3 moves to supercharge the CarbonZero vision?
Yeah, honestly, right now, more funding wouldn't actually make a difference to us because we first have to prove that the model works at the scale that we're starting with. And then only then should we attempt to scale it to additional lines and additional sites. But I think that once we are able to prove that to ourselves and to our investors and to the farmers, we'll likely be in a very good position to scale along the lines of your question. And at that point, it really is about first adding additional lines and working with all of the almond farmers in California. And then we would then look at other sources of biomass that are readily available in the area, and then add additional sites close to those other sources of biomass. And then we would use the same sort of blueprint like over and over again to expand.
Fantastic. Greg, do you have anything to add?
No, I think Harper nailed it. I think that's right.
Okay, so my last question for you two and for our listeners. So people who want to take action, what's one thing they can do today to help move the needle on carbon down draw and regeneration?
Well, everyone can help by being informed about where their food comes from, choosing to buy from local farms whenever possible. Again, our core belief is that the right long-term solution has to be a win-win for the farmers and the climate. And I mean, we all eat, so trying when possible to buy food specifically grown using regenerative farming processes, buying locally and seasonally if you are able to, and so on would be helpful. The other thing that people can do is if they have yards, they can actually adopt practices that improve soil health, like composting, using natural fertilizers, and avoiding tilling. Those are some small things that hopefully a lot of people can implement into their daily lives.
No, I love that answer, actually. Get connected with your food. Know where your food comes from.
Even living in Canada, I do feel we're in North America. Like anytime you travel abroad, like just being in South Africa, the food is so different, so good. Because it's just there. Like they're not mass producing anything like we do in North America, which is the somewhat downfall. Well, thank you both so much for joining me all the way from California. This has been such an insightful and inspiring conversation. I know our listeners will definitely be walking away with a lot to think about. For anyone who wants to dive deeper into your work or follow along what you're doing, what's the best place for them to find you?
I think our website, yeah.
The best way to support the Biochar Show is by subscribing on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review. It helps others discover the show. And if someone in your life would find this episode valuable, go ahead and share that with them. Big thank you again to Harper and Greg, and we'll see you next time on the Biochar Show.